was introduced so early, and then it had this democratization or democratizing effect in terms of the mobility, upward mobility, right? So this is kind of almost like the myth of American dream, right? So from the
Yeah.
rags to the riches, and the exam system did that.
Dr. Huang, in the last segment, we talked about exams in China and how they started back in the sixth century. Did I get the period correct?
Yeah, sixth
Yeah.
century, late
Uh,
sixth century.
what I'm what I'm wondering is what was the motivation behind this? As you described it well, this was way ahead of anything that Europe did for its administration. So
Yeah.
how did China come up with this?
Um, so that's the issue. I have to say I don't really know because you are talking about motivations and by the way, the sixth century version um, is a sort of a systematic version of previous versions that were ad hoc, haphazard, irregular. So the dating of it goes even further than the sixth century.
Oh,
Um,
wow. So in sixth century, just sort of organized it, institutionalized it, if you
yeah,
will.
so that's exactly institutionalization of it.
Oh, wow.
So before it sort of existed here and there, it was oral exam, not written exam, and um, it was sequential. So you first got recommendations, and then you tested people who already got positive recommendations, whereas in the sixth century, they began to expand the eligibility, right? They scaled it to the almost the entire male population beyond the elite. I mean, again, that process took a couple of 100 years to complete. In the ancient times, the system didn't move very fast. In terms of why, I have to say I don't know, and I know that the exam system proved to be beneficial to the autocrat,
To the
right?
autocrat, not to the
Oh,
state in general?
no, that's a good way of looking at it. It was also good to the system as far as the autocrats constituted a major part of that system, right? So
Yeah.
essentially, it promoted autocratic stability. And if you look at the data on the duration of the rulers, they increased after they introduced the exam, and the length of the dynasty also increased somewhat, not as much as the duration of the rulers, but that also increased. And also China became a unified country after the sixth century. Before the sixth century, there was period of unification, but there was also a long period of disunity. After that, sixth century, basically China remained unified except for a short period of time. But majority of that time period is a unified country. China today is a unified autocracy. So it promoted the duration of the ruler rule. It promoted the longevity of the system. It promoted the unification of the country.
As I was reading some of your essays and watching some of your prior interviews, two things that stuck out for me when it came to these exams. I've actually read books about this, and it's a vast subject of how these came about. But one of the things that I realized is that, unlike Europe, Chinese monarchs, emperors, were sort of surrounded by people that were not in the elite, that were not,
Yeah.
let me correct that were not born into
Yeah,
the
yeah,
elite class. That's a difference.
yeah.
And this was sort of subtle. It took me a while to catch up to this. Is my assessment correct here?
Your assessment is absolutely correct. And I'm writing another book with a co-author of mine, Claire Young. We have data to show after the exam was introduced in 6th century, the people around the emperor, the people around the autocrat, became even more of a commoner background than before, right? So the exam definitely tipped the balance in favor of those people who hailed from humble backgrounds relative to born elites.
That didn't exist anywhere else. I mean, if you look at, I don't know, in Middle East, Europe,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
kings and queens were surrounded by other
that's right.
nobility, born
Yeah,
into nobility, right?
yeah. Yeah, so to get back to the earlier question you asked, is China unique? Yeah, I would argue it is unique, right? And the exam system was introduced so early, and then it had this democratization or democratizing effect in terms of the mobility, upward mobility, right? So this is kind of almost like the myth of American dream, right? So from the
Yeah.
rags to the riches, and the exam system did that, right? And whether or not it democratized the system, that's a separate debate. I don't think it democratized the
Yeah.
system. It actually did exactly the opposite. But in terms of the mobility, what's also amazing about this system is that it has both upward mobility and downward mobility, right? And
I don't follow. What do you mean downward
well,
mobility?
you can get promoted, but you can also get demoted.
Based on
For
merits or politics or
no,
both?
no, based on your performance. And
Yeah.
so it was a genuine meritocracy. Sometimes we think about meritocracy only in terms of upward mobility, but a true meritocracy has both upward and downward mobility.
Of course.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, one of the most famous scholars on the exam system is Pingding Ho, and he wrote this big book as early as 1964, documenting both upward and downward mobility. That was really, really incredible.
Yeah. So once you get to a place, you're not entitled to remain there unless you
That's right.
perform.
That's right.
So all of this sounds so positive. It's just, a merit-based
Yeah,
civilization going
yeah,
back to the
yeah,
6th century.
yeah,
Europe doesn't catch up with that.
yeah,
Gosh, let me see, till late 1700s when you look at
yeah, yeah,
France
yeah,
and
yeah. Well,
England.
Prussia started.
That's true.
Yeah, so Prussia was the first.
Frederick the Great, you're right.
Yeah,
Yes.
Frederick the Great. Yeah,
Um,
that yeah.
so what's the problem? This sounds so fabulous. This should have,
the
did this
yeah.
help China's economy?
It did exactly the opposite. And
That's where
yeah,
I don't follow.
okay, um, so going back to our earlier distinction between homogeneity and heterogeneity,
Hmm.
this system promoted homogeneity and it completely eliminated heterogeneity, right? So if you think about economic growth, technological development, it required a degree of heterogeneity or differences of ideas,
Entrepreneurship,
creativity,
inventions, and what have you.
entrepreneurship, disruption, right? So all the kind of buzzwords that we talk about, we use to apply to Silicon Valley,
Exactly.
apply, right? So the system was so effective in promoting upward and downward mobility and in homogenizing the ideas and ideology. It was so successful in that area that it demolished all these other forms of mobility, right? So, and also think about another effect. This is civil service exam. You succeeded at the exam, you got promoted or incorporated into the bureaucracy. It was so powerful that everybody wanted to go into bureaucracy. Okay, suppose you want to run
Versus
a
opening up their own shop or their own sort
absolutely.
of entrepreneur. Oh,
See, it completely diverted human capital from economic arenas, technological arenas, or from political opposition to bureaucracy, right? And so that's the trick. And it is, and this is something that that is so I have mixed feelings about this system, but exactly for the same reason you just pointed out. It was democratizing, it was fair in many, many ways and quite legitimate, but then it led to this result, right?
so when we talk about these exam systems that put you through the system of the bureaucracy, once you're there, the bureaucracy is almost like a system of inculcation
Yeah.
and creating uniform way of thinking.
Uh, well, actually it is much more beyond the bureaucracy. These exams, so let me just a little bit about these exams. It's about sheer memorization. So
Oh,
we so it's not like you know um, doing a
Socratic
religious
method or
essay.
something like
It's
that.
not Socratic. It's all sheer memorization. Who has the best memorization? Young people. And you want to prepare the young people for the exam at a very early age, right? So there are scholars who believe that boys as young as 3, 4, 5 years old began to prepare. Now you you think back, okay, you start from that early age to prepare for the exam, and the curriculum is about one idea: respect for the authority, respect for the emperor, respect for the parents, and basically Confucianist ideology,
Yeah,
right? And you got indoctrinated into that idea at the age of 3, 4, 5 years old, right? And you took the exam, possibly at the age of in our database in the Ming Dynasty, the youngest person who passed the exam, I think I can't quite remember, like 12 years old, 13 years old.
oh,
But the
wow.
but the oldest person was 59, right?
Yeah,
And the average age was 36, right? And during the ancient times, people had shorter life expectancy.
yeah,
36 is practically middle age in the 14th century.
yeah.
So essentially, you spend your whole life preparing for the exam and got indoctrinated in this one ideology, right?
So,
So
okay. So I think you clarified a lot here for me. When we talk about exams and education, this is not what we call exam and education here in the
yeah,
West. This is much different. And one thing that still puzzles me, Dr. Huang, is this. Earlier in this segment, you said almost all male population was was sort of prepare for this, and we're talking about starting to prepare for this at the young age of 3, 4, 5. Who has the money to do this? Is this just
yeah,
for the elite? How
yeah.
does this happen?
Yeah, excellent question. First of all, let me clarify. I didn't say all the male population prepare for it.
Oh,
All the male population was theoretically eligible for it, right? So there's a difference between
eligible.
eligible for it, right?
Okay.
So and uh, uh, and and because of economics, because of other things, not all the male population participated in the exam. So let me come to your question.
Okay.
So the Chinese system was very thoughtful in that regard. They established
You
what
said
is known
thoughtful in that regard? Yeah,
extremely thoughtful. They
got it.
thought through this question, right? So, remember the debate that we're having now
Uh-huh.
about kids, their parents pay thousands and tens of thousands of dollars preparing their children for Ivy League
Yeah, it's happening right
university.
now in America. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
So the Chinese were very thoughtful. They thought about this problem, and then they established nationwide preparatory system that was completely free.
Oh, come on. This is really?
Yeah, the first idea came around the 10th century, and we don't really have data to show how prevalent that system was. By about 14th and 15th century, there were about 2,400 basic administrative units in China, and there were more than 2,300 preparatory schools. So essentially, each basic administrative unit, on average, had one preparatory school. This is as universal as you can
Wow.
get in historical time, right? And it was incredible. I mean, just sort of
Just
foresight. Yeah,
for when you say incredible, if I may share something with our audience, the concept of universal education, free education, one of the earlier people that I know of was Frederick the Great. You and I talked
yeah,
about that
yeah,
in one of the countries within the sort of German peoples. But that was later in the late 1600s, early
yeah,
1700s.
yeah.
You're telling me 10th century on. This, I mean, doesn't this blow your mind?
It absolutely blew my mind. I didn't know this before. And they were thinkers in 9th century, 10th century, educators who argued for educating women, extending
Oh, wow.
basic education to women. They never did it, but at least they made the argument. And their argument is very interesting. Their argument is a very utilitarian argument. They are saying that look at these boys, they are preparing for the exam, and we need their mothers to educate them before they came to these preparatory schools, right? So that's why we need to educate women too. And
Wow.
there's scattered evidence to show the literacy rate for women was not high by any stretch of imagination, but it wasn't zero either, right? And there were famous women poets in Chinese history. So when I was growing up in China, I read these poems. I never thought of that question. Well, how could these women knew how to read and write in 8th century and 9th century? And it was a spillover effect of this system. The, the problem, let me just quickly add
Please, please.
the problem with it. The problem was that the ideology being indoctrinated through the system was so conservative and anti-liberal. So it never became an ideology that advocated equality and fairness, right? So unlike education in the West that educated people about the value of equality, the Chinese system, as thoughtful as it was, never really opened up to female portion of the population, and that was a huge limitation of the system.
Wow. Wow. Okay. We'll be back after a short break to talk about stability and scale. We'll be right back.